It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by Agile Dad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. All right, it's been a minute since I've had something that made me nerd out and just become a total geek. What I can tell you is this. Well, I guess that's not true. Chat GPT rocks. I gotta say that. But the thing that I just discovered that really made my ears tweak a little bit and made me just get excited. Somebody posted a cognitive bias cheat sheet. Now, I don't want to give credit to the author who reposted it because I don't know who did the original. But what I can tell you is this is just fantastic. And I just want to share a little bit about it because I thought it was awesome. So, this may be the original author. I'm going to go ahead and throw his name out there. The guy's name is Buster Benson. And he said this article has been read over 1.7 million times. I can't confirm or deny that because I don't see it here. But it was originally published back in 2016, so who knows? But there's been an update to it here in 2022. So what I've seen is that I've never come across something that really talks about all the different biases and puts it all together. And this cat started with a list of 175 biases and added them all to a spreadsheet, removed duplicates, grouped similar biases or complementary biases. Then he cracked it up into 20 unique bias-based mental strategies. And I mean, I'm fascinated by this. I'm absolutely fascinated by this. So I'm going to make sure I post a link so you can see the article and you can see the information. But he starts out with 4 problems that biases help us address. And I think that's what I'm going to title this episode. So, the 4 problems that biases help us address. Problem number 1 is too much information. Let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, there is Google. What does that mean? There's ChatGPT, right? There's too much information in the world. We are left with no choice but to filter almost all of it out. We have to. Our brain uses a few simple tricks to pick out the bits and pieces of information that are most likely going to be useful to us in some way. And here's some tips. Here's some things that happen. So, number 1, we notice things that are already primed in our memory repeated often. So, if we see things more often, if we feel things more often, it gets loaded in our memory, and there's a lot of truth to this. So that is definitely one of the things that happens. Number 2, bizarre, funny, visually striking, anthropomorphic things stick out more than the non-bizarre, unfunny, mundane things. Our brains tend to boost the importance of things that are unusual or surprising. Absolutely true. Number 3, we notice when something has changed. We'll generally tend to weight a significance of the new value by the direction a change happened, whether it was a positive or a negative change. But we do draw ourselves to change. Number 4, we're drawn to details that confirm our own existing beliefs. This is a huge one. So if we truly believe something and we see something that reinforces it, we're drawn to that. We gravitate towards it, right? And finally, we notice flaws in others more easily than flaws in ourselves. This is one I do as an exercise in my class. I often ask people, how many of you believe that you go to work every day and work with the utmost integrity every single day and do the absolute best job you can? And of course, hands go up. Then I ask people, how many of you think that everyone around you has that same value and goes to work every day with the utmost integrity? And of course, very few hands go up. A lot of things are about perception, and it's so easy for us to identify flaws in others, but oftentimes we break the mirror when we do it, right? So that was all related to problem number 1, too much information. Okay, let's talk about problem number 2. Problem number 2 is not enough meaning. So the world is very confusing, and we end up seeing only a tiny sliver of it, but we need to make some sense of it in order for us to survive. Once the reduced stream of information comes in, if we connect the dots and fill in the gaps with stuff we already think we know, we get an updated mental model of how we see the world. So let's give some supporters here. Number 1, we find stories and patterns even in sparse data. So if you just give us a little bit of data, we can contextually reconstruct whatever it is and try to formulate it. And it could be clustering illusions or, a neglect of probability or illusion of validity. I mean, I can go on and on and on. But what I'm trying to say is our brain will reconstruct the world around us to fit what we see, even with sparse data. Number 2, We fill in characteristics from stereotypes, generalities, and prior histories whenever there are new specific instances or gaps in information. So when we have partial information about a specific thing that belongs to a group of things that we're pretty familiar with, our brain has no problem filling in the gaps with best guesses or with the information trusted sources provide. But we often forget parts were real and which parts were filled in, right? So we often get some mixed up. And this is where people generalize or over exaggerate. Okay. Number three, we imagine things and people we're familiar with or fond of as better than things than people we're not familiar with or fond of. So this is the whole word of mouth piece, which is absolutely good for me. But it's one of these things that if we're familiar with people or fond of people, we often see them as better than they actually are. And we filter out some of the bad bits because you can call it a cheerleader effect or an in-group bias or a halo effect. We want to make things better. All right, next, we simplify probabilities and numbers to make them easier to think about. Our subconscious mind is terrible at math and generally gets all kinds of things wrong about likelihood of something happening if any data is missing at all. And this is the reason why time-based estimations are so terrible, right? So you got base rate fallacy, Murphy's law, all these different things that come into mental accounting, money illusion. I mean, I can go on and on, but this is just one of those things where you're just like, wow, you don't even think about it until you read it. All right, next. We think we know what others are thinking. Oh my goodness, this one's huge, right? In some cases, this means we assume that they know what we know. And in other cases, we assume they're thinking about us as much as we're thinking about ourselves. It's just a case of us modeling our own mind after our own, right? I know it sounds crazy, or modeling their own mind after our own. It's a curse of knowledge, right? Illusion of transparency. It's just we tend to believe that we understand others implicitly. All right. Last one, we project our current mindset and assumptions onto the past and the future, magnified also by the fact that we're not very good at imagining how quickly or slowly things will happen or change over time. This is the one where you hear people say, how come I still look and feel the same way as I did in high school, but everyone else around me is getting so different? And it's one of those things where you see people grow, or when you get older, you start noticing how young other people are. It's just really, really interesting, but it happens all the time. All right, so we're almost there. Problem number three, the need to act fast. We're constrained by time and information, and yet we can't let that paralyze us. Without the ability to act fast in the face of uncertainty, we surely would have perished as species long ago. With every piece of new information, we need to do our best to assess our ability to affect the situation, apply it to decisions, simulate the future to predict what might happen next, and act on our new insight. This one's huge. This is inspect and adapt. This is the empirical process. This is incredible. So let's see what he goes through. Number one, in order to act, we need to be confident in our ability to make an impact and to feel like what we do is important. In reality, most of this confidence can be classified as overconfidence, but without it, we may not act at all, and it's going to put us in analysis paralysis, right? Number two, in order to stay focused, we favor the immediate, relatable thing in front of us over the delayed and instant. Ooh, I like that. Or not instant, delayed and distant. Sorry. We value stuff more in the present than in the future and relate to stories of specific individuals that we know more than anonymous individuals or groups. I'm surprised there aren't more biases found in this genre, considering how much it impacts how we think about the world. But when you start talking about appealing to novelty, identifiable victim effect, those kind of things, that's where this is. All right. Next one. In order to get anything done, we're motivated to complete things that we've already invested time and energy in. So if you think of Newton's first law of motion and a behavioral economist version of it, an object in motion stays in motion. This helps us finish things, even if we come across more and more reasons to give up. So this is where you start talking about sunk cost fallacy, Little's law, all that good stuff. Yes. Okay. Next, in order to avoid mistakes, we're motivated to preserve our autonomy and status in a group and to avoid irreversible decisions. So if we must choose, we tend to choose the option that is perceived to be the least risky. Happens all the time, right? Or that preserves the status quo. It's better to know than not to know. All right. We favor options that appear simple or that have more complete information over more complex or ambiguous options. We'd rather do the quick, simple thing than the important, complicated thing. Even if the important, complicated thing is ultimately a better use of our time and energy, which is really, really interesting, but that's something we all fall into. All right, last one, number four. Number four is what should we remember? And I know that sounds crazy, but there's just too much information in the universe for us to remember all of it. We can only afford to keep around bits that are most likely to prove useful in the future. We need to make constant bets and trade offs around what we try to remember and what we hope to forget. For example, we prefer generalizations over specifics because they take up less space. When there are a lot of irreducible details, we pick out a few standout items to save and discard the rest. What we save here is what we're most likely to inform our filters related to problem ones, information overload, as well as to inform what comes to mind during the process mentioned in problem two around filling in incomplete information, kind of like Mad Libs. It's all self-enforcing, right? Or self-reinforcing. So here are the tie-ins. We edit and reinforce some memories after the fact. So after things happen, during that process, memories become stronger. However, various details get accidentally swapped. It happens. And, there's nothing we can do about that. It's part of life. We discard specifics to form generalities. We do this out of necessity, but the impact of implicit associations, stereotypes, and prejudice result in some of the most glaringly bad consequences from a full set of cognitive bias. Three, we reduce events and lists to their key elements. It's difficult to reduce events and lists to generalities, so instead we pick out a few key items that represent the whole. Finally, we store memories differently based on how they were experienced. Our brains will only encode information that it deems important at the time, but this decision can be affected by other circumstances. What else is happening? How is the information presenting itself? Can we easily find the information again if we need to? These are all things that we do. Now, the truth is, you're never going to remember all of this. Information overload sucks. Our bodies are programmed to aggressively filter. Noise becomes signal, right? We also go through sometimes when we have lack of meaning, it just becomes so confusing. So we fill in the gaps naturally. The signal becomes a story, right? The truth is, in our need to act fast, we often lose our chance, so we jump to conclusions, and stories become our decisions or our reality or perceived reality. And the truth is, it doesn't get any easier to remember. So remembering the important bits tends to be how we construct things. So I guess if I really had to break this whole thing down into just very, very bare bones, simple things that we need to be mindful of. Here are the things we need to be mindful of. Number one, information overload. We don't want to overload ourselves with so much pointless information that we don't have place and time for good information. Number two, we construct the meaning of things out of bits and pieces of information that become part of our reality. So don't be embarrassed if you forget something or remember it differently than others. In order for us to act fast, our brains need to make split second decisions, and sometimes it's not always going to be the right decision. We need to understand and learn how to inspect and adapt. And then finally, we need to come to a conclusion that we tend to remember the most important and useful bits, and that the rest kind of gets downsized or discarded. The truth is, we don't see everything. Our search for meaning will and can conjure illusions. Quick decisions can be sorely flawed. And our memory does reinforce errors. It's just the way that we're built. Nothing can make these things go away, but there are tools that we can use to make it better. So I hope that you'll take the time to go and review. I'm going to drop this article link in the comments or in the chat. I hope that you'll have a chance to go and review this, because this to me was something incredible. I know this went way longer than my normal 10 minutes, but I'm glad that you gave me the opportunity to geek out. If you have a topic you want us to talk about, reach out to us at learnmore@agiledad.com. We'd love to hear from you. As always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.